So in the book, you make it really clear that there are these kind of three key pillars to fortitude, and we've touched upon them already, but it'd be great to explore them just a little bit more detail. The first is about identity. Then there's our sense of control. And then the third part is that feeling part of a group, drawing strength from others. So why do those three key things matter so much for our ability to cope with life's challenges and have this sense of fortitude?
Yeah, I think, it's to try and sort of deconstruct these things. There's a balance, right? I tried to give as much of my working out there and give some of the stuff along the way. I'll give you maybe an example of each, of identity and control. Identity, there's a heartbreaking piece of work that I was looking at that came from the AIDS epidemic, and it was a really intriguing work. It's fascinating to sort of go back 40 years, I guess, and have a look at the stages that happened when AIDS was first discovered, HIV was first discovered, because the papers at the time, the academic papers at the time, were being published really quickly, trying to solve the mystery of what was going on. The first mention of HIV in newspapers was in the New York Times, and it said 41 gay men affected with a rare form of cancer. It's like, no one really knew what was going on. And so what happened at the time was studies were commissioned. And there was one piece of work that really blew me away, which was a study of 71 people who'd tested positive for HIV. They turned out to be all gay men because of the profile of the illness at the time. And it studied them. It said, we're going to study these men for the next 7 years. And so it's really intriguing, longitudinal study to try and understand what were the things they were guessing at the time, what were the things that were determining outcomes. And what they found was, remarkably, one of the biggest predictors of the outcomes, for the health outcomes to people concerned, was how open they were about their sexuality. Now, different era, but not completely different, 40 years ago. But a lot of these gay men weren't open to their families, and a lot of them weren't open to their colleagues at work. Interestingly, those who had much better life outcomes. Those who were embarrassed to tell their family and friends, maybe fearing rejection, maybe fearing sort of their identity would be stigmatized, they were far quicker to develop full-blown AIDS, and they were far more likely to die. When you read it, you're like, wow, I'm sort of devastated and blown away by it. But it sort of demonstrates what you often hear from people who have stigmatized identities. One of the remaining stigmatized identities is people who are overweight. Like people who are sort of have huge obesity. Generally, what you find is that they say, look, society still stigmatizes us. They still, they're disapproving of us. And if you see the impact that has on people's well-being, you can measure, it has this psychological damage on them. So people's identities, feeling proud of their identities. Look, the way we might witness that is we might witness that as actually things like Black History Month or Pride might just seem like elements of the calendar that we've added color to our lives now. But what you realize is these things aren't trivial. They actually enable those people who really benefit, their identity benefits from those, can be genuinely life-saving, transforming. So look, I think sort of compelling evidence for that. Second part is that I guess the final part is that part of control, that when we feel helpless about the situation we're in, it can be devastating for the impact that we have. And our mind plays tricks on us here. There was a really lovely piece of work studying nurses in Scotland. And these nurses, they were given sort of body tracking, they were given stress monitors, all manner of things. And then they ended up working about 16-hour days. But what was discovered was the nurses who'd chosen to work 16-hour days because they'd said, overtime was being offered to them, would you like to work it? The nurses who worked long shifts but had chosen to do it substantially were in a much better place, health-wise, stress-wise, than those who'd been told they had to work 16-hour days. Side by side, the exactly same shift, but half of them had thought, well, this gives me an opportunity to save up for my holiday or gas bill, right? But buy some food, like this, the ones who'd chosen to do it were fundamentally in a different place to the ones who felt like, oh, I need to do this, otherwise I can't get through the month. And they were forced to do it. And there seemed to be like, there's something, when we have a degree of control about our circumstances, it transforms even identical situations. So, these things play a really critical part. And then you might say, okay, so how can you use that? Well, if someone is in front of you showing signs of being broken by their situation or being overwhelmed, then what psychologists will say to you is, right, what do you have control over? Can you say no to a few things? Right? Can you try and get some agency over the situation that's in front of you? What can you bring an aspect of control to? And I think even those small little maneuvers can have an impact of just making us feel like the world is slightly less toxic to us.
Yeah. Do you know what? As I was reading the section on control, I've just dog-eared a part here where it specifically talks about the teaching profession. And you talk about a phenomenon known as curriculum crowding, which I know that everyone watching this who's a teacher will be able to relate to, where the list of subjects mandated to be taught has become ever longer and ever more prescriptive. Just also for children. So there's that pressure on teachers and feeling like I have a bit less control because I'm being told I have to teach this. It's mandatory. It's on the national curriculum. And then it says for children, the lack of autonomy, the lack of sense of personal control, the relentless burden of testing, grading, ranking leaves them oscillating between stress and the boredom generated by joyless teaching. And, your book is not... your book is a hopeful book. It kind of signposting, okay, what are the things that help us feel this sense of fortitude, and how can you, like you've just described, kind of make these small maneuvers. And I think that's really important for teachers to kind of hear and understand, that although there are restrictions, that there are some things we have to do, but equally, if we focus on the areas of our work and our jobs that we can exercise some form of control over, a bit like those nurses, we can be in identical situations, but actually our experiences might be quite different. So is that something that you would say to people in the education system, is kind of find those elements where you can control aspects of your work and also outside of work, your personal life, and that might make a difference?
Yeah, it's the critical thing. The one thing that I hear all the time, organizations say to me, look, our teams here are burnt out. What can we do? And so you sit down and you go through. So what's the experience working at the organization? Well, people have got about 25 hours a week of meetings, and then, 400 emails every week or whatever. And, then these demands upon them to fill in timesheets and these various things. You think, okay, well, yeah, it's no wonder then that people, when they get a demand on them, prepare this report for the next 2 hours. They feel overwhelmed. They feel like they've got no control. They feel helpless. And so then it's about, okay, well, are there any things that you could do? So, for office workers, you'd say, okay, can you create zones where people have no meetings? Is there a meeting-free day? Can you try and cut down some of the admin? And it's about trying to sort of give people a degree of control over the things that they have to do, so they don't feel overwhelmed by the things that they're sort of being compelled to do. They've got some opportunity to pull some levers of control themselves.
There was just one last thing on that point. There's an organization called Teachappy, and it's a little app teachers can have on their phones, and it surveys them kind of every day. So they have some really interesting insights. And there was one graph I remember seeing, and they have, when you sign up to the app, you say what school you're in, whether it's good, outstanding, requires improvement, etc. They've got a whole load of information about you as a teacher. They asked how frequently do you socialize with your colleagues outside of school? And I think it might have even specifically said go to the pub. And there was just like a really clear correlation between the more frequently teachers went to the pub with their colleagues, the more likely it was they worked in an outstanding school, and then a good, and then a requires improvement. And I think, again, it peaked actually if you worked in an inadequate school, maybe because you need to go to the pub to cope with those extra pressures. But what made me smile about that was the very first school I worked at in London. It was an inner London school. it was a state school, so facing the same pressures that, you know, all state school teachers face. It was a challenging school to work at, real diverse mix of children. But we went to the pub quite frequently, partly because of geography. We were near several pubs, so it was easy to go to the pub. And if it was payday, we went to the posh pub, and if it wasn't payday, we went to the Wetherspoons. But either way, I just remember reflecting, actually, I think that's probably one of the happiest schools I've worked in. And I think it's because I felt like I was friends with my colleagues outside of work. And it wasn't like a big boozy culture. Lots of people were driving, so they weren't even drinking alcohol. It was just, often we would go to the pub almost like a de-stressor from the week, to signal it's the weekend. And yeah, I think from that fortitude, deriving strength from others, I think that was a big part of it, the socializing. Like we were a team in school and also outside of school as well.
It's huge. I met one woman who'd changed the culture of the company she worked in, and she said the culture's wretched here. No one speaks to each other. No one interacts. And she was actually the receptionist, and she was an actor. You know, she'd get on a part in EastEnders. She'd do that for 6 weeks, then back as a receptionist. And so she sent an email around the whole company saying, ladies and gentlemen, today is the best day of the week because at 4 o'clock, please join me for Crisp Thursday. So no booze. And all she'd done, she'd bought some kettle chips, some Pringles. She laid them out on paper plates, and she invited everyone to come along to Crisp Thursday. Now, like, it's so far so silly. We all love crisps, but is that anyway? It became a tradition in the agency, to the extent that occasionally people would bring along some prosecco, or someone would bring along some beer. You know, it wasn't the defining part of it. Defining part of it was crisps, but it transformed the culture. And what I love about that story is that, firstly, it shows the culture doesn't need to be led from the top. It can, you know, that sense of affiliation can be built by all of us. We can all build a strong bond, either with the support or without the support. But secondly, exactly to your point, and I'm going to go and search that Teachappy data now, exactly to your point, good teams generally socialize together. And, you know, I think we've learned that actually saying that that's going to be in the pub after certain hours, probably as time's gone on, we've recognized that means that people have got kids they need to pick up themselves, or care responsibilities themselves. They can't do it. Or some people don't want to go to the pub. So you need to think, okay, well, the basic ingredients was right, but we need to find a new way to do it in a more adaptable way. But good teams socialize together, and finding the way to do that is a really critical part of building strong teams, I think.
Excellent. Bruce, that brings us to the end of our interview. And I haven't read The Joy of Work yet, but it's been on my to buy list for a while. So that's the first thing I'm going to do after this is get on Amazon and get that. For anyone that's enjoyed this interview, I would highly recommend Bruce's book, Fortitude. You can see all the post-it notes and my scribbles in the margin. It's a book, whether you're a teacher, a parent, a school leader, even if you don't work in the school and you're watching this, it's a book I think that we can all learn from and benefit from, to understand ourselves better, to understand each other better. So thank you so much, Bruce, for joining me today.
Love to chat to you. Thank you, Adrian.